February 20th, 1943. North of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The desert air trembles with heat, and the horizon is blurred by dust kicked up from the restless movement of machines. To the men inside their armored hulls, the world has narrowed to the hum of engines, the smell of oil and sweat, and the slow, rhythmic thudding of their own hearts. From a German observation post, tank commanders peer across the ochre sands, searching for movement. They have fought long enough to know what to expect. The lumbering approach of American armor, uncoordinated, hesitant, a blunt instrument of war. Yet what they witness this morning does not fit within the patterns they understand. 5 Sherman tanks emerge from the haze, moving like hunters across the broken terrain. They are separated by ridges and gullies, scattered out of sight of one another, and yet, impossibly, they move as one. Each tank seems to know where the others are, each maneuver anticipating the movement of its unseen companions. Through the drifting smoke, they advance in perfect rhythm, their timing exact, their formations fluid. The German officers lower their binoculars, uncertain. No flares, no signal flags, no riders darting between machines. Nothing that could explain how these American tanks are coordinating with such eerie precision. To the German eye, it looks like chaos made graceful, an army of machines that thinks together. What they are witnessing is not magic, but the future. Invisible, intangible, and carried upon the air. A revolution in the way men fight. The story of that revolution does not begin in the desert, nor in any battlefield at all. It begins in laboratories, in factories, and in the minds of engineers who believed that the greatest weapon of war might not be armor or guns, but communication. In the late 1930s, the German Wehrmacht had mastered the art of coordinated warfare. Its armored divisions swept across Europe like a single organism, tanks, infantry, and aircraft bound together by radio. Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, had insisted that every German command tank carry a radio set, and that voice communication, not flag signals, must guide the flow of battle. It was this doctrine, born of radio, that had carried the panzers across Poland, France, and into the Soviet Union. But by 1943, that technological edge had faded. The radios that once gave Germany its coordination had become its limitation. The standard Panzer radio, the Fu-G5, was a marvel by the standards of the 1930s, a 10-watt transmitter using amplitude modulation, or AM. Yet in the fury of combat, it faltered. The roar of engines and the crackle of static overwhelmed its fragile voice. Its range, once measured in kilometers on a quiet test field, shrank to mere hundreds of meters amid the metallic din of moving armor. Worse still, most German tanks carried only receivers. They could listen, but not speak. So when a command tank was destroyed, the rest were silenced. A platoon became blind, deaf, and alone. Across the Atlantic, in the bustling industrial heart of America, engineers were solving problems the Germans did not yet know existed. At the Galvin Manufacturing Company of Chicago, a name that would soon become Motorola, a small team worked under the guidance of Daniel E. Noble and Henrik Magnuski. They were experimenting with the technology that, until then, was little more than a scientific curiosity: frequency modulation. Where amplitude modulation rode the crests of electric noise, frequency modulation glided between them. It ignored the static of spark plugs, the pulse of motors, and the electric chaos of battle. FM promised something extraordinary: clarity. In 1941, the U.S. Army Signal Corps standardized this technology in the SCR-508 family of tank radios. It was heavy, 181 pounds of tubes, resistors, and crystal oscillators, but it transformed a Sherman tank into something the world had never seen before: a moving node in a living, breathing battlefield network. Each tank could transmit and receive. Each voice could reach every other. No longer did a commander rely on gestures or prearranged signals. Communication was constant, fluid, adaptable, alive. When American tanks first landed in North Africa during Operation Torch in November 1942, few understood what advantage they carried. Their steel was thinner, their guns smaller, and their crews inexperienced. The Germans saw them as inferior machines, and on paper they were. But hidden within each Sherman was an invisible strength more decisive than armor: connection. As the first battles unfolded across the deserts of Tunisia, German crews began to notice strange patterns. American tanks seemed to appear where they were least expected. They coordinated ambushes through sandstorms. They reacted instantly to flanking maneuvers that should have gone unnoticed. German signals intelligence units listening in were astonished. The Americans' voices came through with crystalline clarity. Calm, organized, unwavering. Even at distances where German radios could produce only a low hiss of static, the American transmissions rang clear and strong. To the German ear, it sounded almost supernatural. But the difference lay not in mysticism, but in physics. The American SCR-508, transmitting at 25 watts, more than double the German FUG-5, operated between 20 and 27.9 megahertz. Its frequencies were crystal-controlled, stable to 0.01%. Two receivers allowed commanders to monitor both their platoon and company channels simultaneously. Every tank was both a weapon and a communicator. The result was a transformation not visible to the naked eye. An American tank unit could act as a single organism. If a commander fell, another could assume control seamlessly. If a platoon scattered across rough terrain, their cohesion held, bound by invisible threads of voice and signal. When the Germans advanced at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, they faced an army learning to see through sound. The battle would become infamous. A tactical defeat for the Americans, but a revelation for those who fought in it. Amid the chaos and confusion of retreat, scattered units of the U.S. 1st Armored Division retained communication across 50 miles of desert. Crews who had never met coordinated attacks warned one another of danger and even called for artillery support, all through the clear tones of FM radios. The Germans, victorious on the ground, were troubled by what they had heard. Their intelligence officers recorded American transmissions of remarkable clarity. One report, later found in captured archives, noted that every American tank appeared capable of transmitting. To the Wehrmacht, this was unthinkable. They did not yet realize that what they were witnessing was not a single battle, but the birth of a new form of warfare, one in which victory would belong not to the thickest armor, nor the largest gun, but to those who could share information fastest. As the months passed, the American tanks pushed northward. By the time they crossed into Sicily and then into Italy, their radio networks had become second nature. Crews spoke in clipped codes and call signs, the air alive with constant murmurs of coordination. In the mountains of Italy, where stone ridges broke the line of sight, frequency modulation proved its genius. German AM radios, crippled by echoes and interference, failed entirely. The Americans, their voices carried cleanly through the valleys, coordinated movements invisible to their foes. Platoons separated by entire ridgelines attacked in unison, striking with a precision that seemed guided by some unseen hand. To the Germans, it was unnerving, the feeling of fighting an enemy that could think collectively. To the Americans, it was liberation. For the first time, tank crews no longer felt isolated inside their armored shells. A gunner could speak to his commander. A commander could reach his company miles away. And somewhere, over the hum of static, another human voice answered, proof that they were not alone. What began as an engineering problem in Chicago had become a psychological transformation on the battlefield. The air itself had become a lifeline, carrying courage, orders, and reassurance. The world was beginning to learn a new truth, that in the age of machines, connection would become the ultimate form of strength. Autumn 1943. Rain drizzles over the Italian hills, and the tracks of tanks cut deep wounds into the mud. The once bright paint of the Sherman has faded to the color of the earth itself. In the narrow valleys around Cassino, thunder echoes, not from the sky, but from the endless exchange of shells between two armies locked in the stone ribs of the Apennines. Here, among the shattered monasteries and olive groves, the Americans' invisible advantage grows ever more apparent. German armor lurks behind ridge lines, its radios smothered by static that ricochets from the mountainsides. Voices dissolve into distortion. Orders repeat, then vanish. Commanders can only hope their men have heard. But on the American frequencies, there is calm. The FM waves slip between peaks, unbroken. The voices that travel across them are level and steady, reminders that order still exists amid the chaos. A platoon out of sight can still be felt, its presence confirmed in a brief click of the microphone, a call sign murmured, a message received and answered. The desert had taught the Americans confidence. Italy teaches them trust. A tank crew learns to move without seeing the others, to act on a word rather than a gesture. In these moments, the battlefield begins to resemble something almost organic, a living network whose nerves pulse with radio signals instead of blood. And so it continues across Europe. June 6, 1944. The sea off Normandy boils with landing craft. The morning air is thick with cordite and fear. As the ramps fall, American tanks surge through the surf toward the bocage, that dense maze of hedgerows that will swallow whole divisions before the summer ends. Inside their steel hulls, the crews can hear not the roar of the ocean, but voices. Calm, clipped, purposeful, each unit in constant touch with the others, even as the beach turns to fire around them. From offshore destroyers, spotters relay gunfire coordinates directly to the tanks. From the tanks, infantry positions are reported back. The system functions like a single consciousness stretched across sea and land. Yet the hedgerows bring a cruel revelation. Here, in these tangled fields where visibility shrinks to meters, the link between tank and infantry breaks. Their radios speak different languages. Tank sets on 20 to 27 megahertz, infantry on 40, 48. The Americans have discovered the one place where their network cannot reach. The result is deadly. German soldiers armed with Panzerfausts creep close enough to strike unseen. Infantrymen shout warnings the tankers cannot hear. The connection that once bound them together has fractured. But American ingenuity does not rest long. In workshops and field depots, soldiers weld telephone boxes to the rear armor of their Shermans. Ordinary EE-8 field phones wired straight into the intercom. Now, an infantryman can lift the handset and speak directly to the men inside. It is a simple fix, but it changes everything. By the time Operation Cobra begins in late July, the American war machine has learned once again how to talk to itself. The result is breathtaking. Over 200 Sherman tanks surge through the French countryside in a choreography of steel. Orders ripple through the radio nets with a precision no army has ever achieved. From the company commanders down to the newest crewmen, each voice contributes to a symphony of movement. When one unit stumbles upon an ambush, another, miles away, turns to flank without being told. Artillery responds within minutes. The sky above fills with the howl of shells directed by coordinates spoken over those invisible lines. The Germans of Panzer-Lehr, once the elite of the armored force, are caught in a storm they cannot comprehend. Their tanks, individually magnificent, fight alone. Their orders come late, distorted, or not at all. When a command tank burns, its subordinates fall silent, each one an isolated island of steel surrounded by chaos. In American formations, no such silence exists. Destroy one tank, and the network still hums. Destroy a dozen, and it still speaks. The strength lies not in any single machine, but in the web that binds them together. As the weeks pass, the German officers begin to sense it. They see the same Shermans appearing where none should be, reacting to threats that should have gone unseen. Some whisper that the Americans have mastered a new form of reconnaissance. Others that they possess a system of radar aboard every tank. None imagine that it is merely the purity of a signal, carried cleanly through the air. By the time Allied armor breaks through at St. Lo, the difference is no longer tactical. It is existential. One army moves as a single body. The other stumbles forward as disconnected limbs. For the crews themselves, the change is more intimate. Within the Sherman, the intercom binds 4 men, commander, gunner, loader, and driver, into something like a family. They hear each other breathe. They share jokes between bursts of static. When a shell lands close, their first instinct is not fear, but communication. Are you all right? In the German tanks, even that comfort is often absent. Without full intercoms, they shout over the thunder of the engine, slap one another's shoulders for attention, guess at commands. When the hatch closes, each man is trapped inside his own noise. To the Americans, the radio has become more than a weapon. It is reassurance, connection, and faith. The ether carries not only orders but courage itself. A calm voice over the net can steady hands shaking in the dark. A few simple words, "We're here, hold your ground," can turn isolation into resolve. By the end of that summer, the principle is clear to anyone who listens. The side that communicates fastest survives. What began as a 181-pound box of circuits has reshaped the nature of warfare. The signal travels faster than any bullet, and it binds men tighter than armor. Soon, as the Allied armies drive east toward the German border, that invisible web will stretch across an entire continent, a living network of voices that will carry them to victory. And somewhere, within that steady hum of transmission, lies the quiet realization that the future of war no longer belongs to those who build the strongest tanks, but to those who learn to make them speak. August 1944. France lies in ruins, yet alive with motion. Endless convoys of American armor roll eastward through the smoke and dust of liberation. Villages once silent under occupation now echo with the rumble of engines, the laughter of children, and the staccato rhythm of distant gunfire. The American advance is a river of machines, flowing faster than any army in history. And within that river, unseen but ever present, runs another current. The hum of radio waves tying together thousands of voices, thousands of minds. Every tank commander knows his call sign, every platoon its frequency. The map no longer dictates the tempo of war, the network does. Orders pass from Corps headquarters to a single Sherman turret in seconds. Artillery, armor, and air all speak the same invisible language. The Germans retreating through the shattered hedgerows feel the difference like a weight pressing upon them. Their panzers are still formidable, panthers and tigers whose shells can pierce a Sherman's armor from a mile away. But their power is scattered. Communication lines snap under the strain of retreat. Telephone cables are cut, couriers vanish, and the airwaves, thick with static, carry little but fragments. Wherever the Wehrmacht tries to stand, American radio coordination turns the ground beneath them to quicksand. At Saint-Lambert, a single call for support brings artillery crashing down within minutes. At Mortagne, tank destroyers hidden miles away turn their guns on German armor they cannot see, guided by the calm voices of observers over the net. To German crews, it feels as though the enemy can see through the fog, anticipate every move, respond before a shot is fired. But what they are facing is not foresight. It is communication operating at the speed of thought. In September, the storm gathers again at a small French town called Héricourt. The fields are shrouded in mist. The morning air smells of rain and cordite. Across the plains, the 4th Armored Division waits, its Shermans lined behind hedges glistening with dew. Somewhere beyond, the newly formed German panzer brigades are approaching. Hundreds of panthers gleaming and deadly, each one superior in armor and firepower to any Sherman that will oppose it. On paper, the battle should be brief. But the Americans possess something the Germans do not: an invisible advantage humming quietly within each tank. When the first German shells fall, the American net comes alive. Voices weave across the frequencies. coordinates, directions, warnings. The fog hides everything but the signal. Commanders, unable to see more than a few yards ahead, navigate the battle by sound alone. One Sherman spots a panther moving through the haze. The commander calls out its bearing, and a tank destroyer half a mile away pivots, fires, and obliterates it with a single shot. Across the radio net, a brief confirmation. Target down. Then silence as the network waits for the next voice. Hour after hour, this rhythm continues. The calm, practiced speech of men who trust the voices they cannot see. For the Germans, chaos reigns. Their tanks, faster and stronger, advance without coordination. Commanders shout into radios that yield only static. Units stumble into one another, blind in the fog. When a command tank is destroyed, the rest of the formation freezes, unsure of the next move. By the end of 3 weeks, 281 German armored vehicles lie wrecked across the fields of Aricourt. The Americans have lost 41, a 7-to-1 ratio that no chart of armor thickness or gun caliber can explain. The secret is not the machine, but the connection between machines. The voices that fill the ether are not heroic or dramatic. They are measured, almost gentle. Shift fire left. Advance 200 yards. Hold until flank clears. Each word travels faster than the human eye can perceive, faster than any runner, faster even than a thought might cross a battlefield. In those transmissions lies the beginning of a truth that will echo through every war that follows. The network always defeats the isolated. By autumn, as the Allied armies approach the borders of Germany, that network stretches from the Channel to the Rhine. Headquarters can speak directly to forward platoons. Air support listens in on tank nets. The battlefield itself has become an organism of information, each part aware of the whole. For the men inside the tanks, this awareness feels almost supernatural. They fight knowing they are never truly alone. Even in the darkest nights when the horizon burns and tracer fire cuts the sky, the soft voice on the radio reminds them. Someone is listening. Someone knows they are there. For the Germans, isolation has become a kind of silence that eats at the nerves. Inside a panther, the thick armor that once felt like protection now feels like a prison. The air smells of oil and ozone. Voices are muffled by steel. Orders arrive late, if they arrive at all. The vast power of the machine means nothing without the coordination to use it. Field reports from captured German officers speak of frustration and disbelief. They describe American movements that seem impossibly synchronized, artillery that reacts within moments, tanks that strike from directions no one saw. They blame training, luck, or numbers, but never the invisible web that binds their enemy together. In the after-action reports of the U.S. Army, the explanation is simple. Communication. Every Sherman can transmit, every Sherman can receive. The network cannot be destroyed by the loss of any single unit. The battles of France mark more than a series of victories. They reveal a new order of warfare. The armored spearhead has evolved from a collection of machines into a single, coordinated intelligence. And in that transformation lies a glimpse of the future. For centuries, generals had sought strength in numbers, firepower, or courage. Now, strength resides in connection. The faster an army can share what it knows, the stronger it becomes. As autumn fades into winter, the roads of France are lined with the remnants of Germany's once invincible armor. The air is quiet, but if one listens closely, the faint murmur of radio chatter still lingers, a whisper of how the world has changed. In the fields of Aricourt and beyond, victory has taken on a new sound. Not the roar of guns, but the calm voice on a frequency no enemy can silence. Winter descends upon Europe. The wind that sweeps across the Ardennes smells of pine and diesel. Snow gathers in the hollows of tank tracks, muffling the sound of movement. Beneath that quiet blanket, two armies prepare for one final reckoning. December 1944. The German counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, erupts with the fury of a dying empire. From the forests of the Ardennes, the panzers strike through the fog, crashing into thin American lines. Once again, the advantage of surprise belongs to Germany. But this time, the battlefield has changed. In the first hours of the assault, chaos reigns. American units are scattered, towns overrun, communications cut by the advancing tide. Yet even as outposts fall silent, the network does not die. Portable radios carried by small groups of soldiers keep the web alive, transmitting positions, enemy strengths, fragments of information that weave together into a coherent picture of the attack. Commanders, miles away, connected through this invisible thread, begin to see what is unfolding long before any scout or messenger could reach them. And so the counterattack begins. In the snow-covered fields near Bastogne, American tank crews move like ghosts, guided not by sight but by the voices whispering in their headsets. They know the terrain through the words of others. Units reporting from flanks, scouts relaying German movements, artillery batteries adjusting their fire with uncanny precision. The fog and snow that once favored the Germans now favor those who can speak through them. At Bastogne itself, where the 101st Airborne holds out against encirclement, the radio becomes the garrison's lifeline. Supplies, reinforcements, and even hope flow through the air in coded bursts. Pilots above the clouds listen for the desperate words of ground controllers, timing their drops to the second. In the icy forests below, soldiers crouch beside glowing sets, hearing the calm assurance of a voice that reminds them they are not forgotten. When General McAuliffe in famous reply, "Nuts," is sent to the German demand for surrender. It travels not by courier, but over the airwaves, rebroadcast across the Allied front. It is more than defiance. It is proof that the signal endures. By January, the German thrust has been blunted. Their tanks lie wrecked in frozen ditches, their fuel exhausted, their lines fractured. Once again, the contrast is clear. The side that could coordinate survived. The side that fought alone perished. As the snow melts and spring returns, the Allies surge forward. Across the Rhine, American engineers throw pontoon bridges under fire while tank units assemble for the final drive into the heart of Germany. The scale is staggering. Hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, yet they move with the coherence of a single organism. Each division speaks on its assigned frequency, each company linked to the next. Air support patrols above, tuned to the same network, ready to respond in minutes. From headquarters to the smallest outpost, the command structure is not a pyramid, but a web. At dawn on March 7, 1945, a patrol reaches the town of Remagen and finds the Ludendorff Bridge still standing. The order to seize it travels by radio faster than the Germans can react. Within hours, Sherman tanks are crossing into the German heartland. The message spreads across the network like an electric current. The Rhine has been breached. For the soldiers who hear it, the moment feels unreal. Years of struggle, of mud and blood and smoke, now distilled into a single phrase carried on the air. In the final weeks, the radio nets become the pulse of the advancing army. Tankers in Bavaria hear reports from the Elbe. Infantrymen in Cologne pick up signals from the Netherlands. The battlefield, once fractured into 1,000 isolated fights, has become a unified, breathing system. For the Germans, this level of coordination is unimaginable. Their radios, though technically capable, remain restricted by doctrine. Orders must flow downward from the top. Initiative is punished. Where the Americans' net thrives on improvisation, the German structure suffocates in rigidity. A captured Wehrmacht officer later remarks, "We fought machines. But behind those machines was something we could not destroy: their unity." When the end comes, it is not marked by one final climactic battle, but by a gradual silencing of frequencies. As American tanks roll through shattered towns, the voices on the net grow fewer. Reports become confirmations, then acknowledgments, then, finally, nothing. The air clears. the static fades. The war that began with words shouted over crude transmitters in North Africa ends in silence over the ruins of Berlin. In that silence lies a realization that echoes through history. The radio had not merely changed how men fought, it had changed what it meant to fight together. The tank, once a symbol of individual power, had become a vessel of communication, a node in a living network. The future of warfare would belong not to the strongest armor, but to the swiftest information. From that foundation would rise the doctrines of the modern age: command and control systems, digital networks, satellites, and data links, all born from the soft murmur of those first battlefield frequencies. For the men who lived it, the transformation was more personal. They remembered the smell of hot steel, the trembling hum of the engine, the gentle hiss of static in their ears. They remembered the comfort of a familiar voice in the chaos, the sound that told them they were part of something greater than themselves. Long after the guns fell silent, many would say that the radio saved them more often than armor ever did. And as the 20th century moved on, into Korea, Vietnam, the deserts and cities of later wars, that principle endured. Every soldier carrying a transmitter, every tank equipped with a headset, every pilot guided by unseen words, all were descendants of the invisible network born in the fields of Europe. The American tankers who once rolled through mud and fog could not have known that they were witnessing the dawn of a new kind of power, not the power to destroy, but the power to connect. A voice over static, a signal in the dark, and the unspoken promise that no matter the noise, no matter the distance, someone is always listening. The war ended not with thunder, but with silence. A silence that spread across Europe like the first breath after a storm. In its wake lay the wreckage of empires, towns reduced to dust, fields scarred by treads, rivers thick with memory. And in that stillness, the air itself seemed haunted. For though the guns were quiet, the ether still carried echoes, faint, fading signals from the world's greatest struggle. The last transmissions of a war fought not only with fire and steel, but with words, coordination, and connection. For 6 long years, the human voice had been a weapon. Now, in peace, it would become something else. In the ruins of Europe, engineers and soldiers gathered to study what had happened. Not just the destruction, but the unseen architecture that had made victory possible. They traced cables and frequencies across the map, realizing that the Allied triumph had not been merely material. It had been informational. The network, once an improvised patchwork of tank radios, field sets, and codebooks, had evolved into a living intelligence. It could see across hundreds of miles, predict movements, and knit together chaos into understanding. From this revelation, a new doctrine was born: command and control, the art of shaping a battle through communication. As the ashes cooled, America and the Soviet Union emerged as twin giants. Their rivalry defined not only by armies and ideology, but by networks. In the Cold War that followed, the lessons of the battlefield were transcribed into cables beneath oceans, into radar towers piercing the clouds, into satellites orbiting a fragile blue planet. Where once a radio operator's trembling hand turned a dial in a Sherman tank, now computers began to think in signals of their own, binary successors to the same invisible language. In this new age, distance no longer meant disconnection. The planet itself was becoming one vast, humming battlefield of information. Yet the essence of that transformation was profoundly human, for beneath every code, every transmission, every burst of static, there remained a voice, someone speaking into uncertainty, hoping to be heard. It is easy to think of communication as mechanical: antennas, switches, encryption. But in the end, it is the most human of all technologies. Every soldier who keyed a microphone in fear or exhaustion was, in that moment, affirming something ancient: the will to reach another mind across the void. That is what the radio did. It turned isolation into connection. It made courage contagious. In the decades that followed, the ghosts of those wartime frequencies continued to echo through new conflicts. In Korea, Marines used radios to call fire missions on mountains they could not see. In Vietnam, helicopters hovered over jungles guided by voices below. Each war more connected, more instantaneous, more dependent on the unseen web that first took shape in those muddy European fields. By the late 20th century, satellites circled overhead like silent guardians. The invisible battlefield had grown global. Commanders could see entire continents in real time, their decisions transmitted at the speed of light. What had once been a miracle of communication between two tanks was now the backbone of civilization itself. The same principles guiding not just armies but economies, navigation, medicine, and human connection. The network that began as a whisper between soldiers had become the bloodstream of the modern world. And yet, beneath all that progress lies a quiet irony. The more connected we become, the more fragile that connection feels. In the age of instant communication, it is easy to forget the weight those early words carried. Each transmission in the Second World War was a lifeline, often spoken by men who did not know if they would live to hear a reply. Their voices were steady not because they were unafraid, but because they understood that fear could spread through a microphone as quickly as courage. Theirs was a discipline born of necessity, the calm tone that steadied hearts in the storm. Perhaps that is why, when historians listen to those preserved recordings today, they hear something almost sacred. The crackle of static, the clipped syllables, the quiet confidence of someone who knows that the signal, however faint, must go on. Those voices remind us that communication at its core is not about dominance or technology, but about understanding. It is about reaching out through chaos to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." In the end, that was the true legacy of the American radio network. Not the conquest of Germany, but the triumph of connection over isolation. It showed that even in war, humanity's greatest weapon was not its machinery, but its ability to share knowledge, to coordinate purpose, to speak, and to listen. The tankers who once sat in their cramped steel coffins, surrounded by fire, could never have known that their calm exchanges over static would become the blueprint for how civilization itself communicates. But they understood something timeless, that every signal, no matter how faint, deserves to be answered. Today, when we speak into the air, through phones, satellites, or the invisible threads of the internet, we are, in some distant sense, continuing the same act. We are sending our voices into uncertainty, trusting that someone, somewhere, will hear. The story that began with the crackle of a field radio now stretches across the globe, binding billions of souls into one vast, continuous conversation. The invisible weapon of the 20th century became the invisible bond of the 21st. And if one listens closely, amid the noise of the modern world, one can still hear the echo of those first battlefield frequencies, a faint murmur beneath all our signals, a reminder whispered through time, that connection, not conquest, is humanity's truest victory.